Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It's Thursday. We are going to jump back into Robert Tellis on the stand. Then we get to cross. This is going to be a 2-episode day. I'm still about an hour and a half behind on testimony. My oldest had oral surgery today, so I've been taking care of her, running to the pharmacy, picking up my kid from middle school. Not sure if it'll get out tonight. We'll see, but I wanted to get part 1 out for you. We're going to jump in, but before we get started, you know the drill. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Click the little bell icon. Music fact of the day. How did Depeche Mode get their name? It was actually the title of a French magazine. Translated, it means fast fashion. It was chosen because they thought it sounded cool. Their original name was The Composition of Sound. Real quick, I'm starting to put some Halloween shirts in the merch store. The link is in the description wherever you're listening or watching this. 10% off everything in the store with code Sherlock10 at checkout. I love designing t-shirts, especially Halloween ones. So they're not going to be true crime related, just Halloween shirts. Let's jump in. Robert clarified today his name is pronounced Tejas, and I will say Robert Tejas is the captain of the Hot Mess Express. I've never seen anything like this in my life. I would have given anything to be in that courtroom when he was on the stand. Now, remember, Robert is doing a narration testimony, meaning he is not being asked questions by the defense. He is just telling his story straight up. So he's calling exhibits as he goes on. He wants to show the probate court video, but the judge said they would not allow that to be shown in court. However, the jury will have access to that during deliberations. He shows a photo of the killer's pants. He said, I don't believe they look the same. There was an objection that was sustained. He said, none of my other pants were taken from my home on the day of the search warrant. And as a result of my jeans being taken, I was put in a paper suit and the room was cold. When I asked to have the temperature adjusted, there was no help. I spent the day freezing in that suit. There were various things done, I believe, to break me. I expressed concern about my family as questioning went on. I believe things were done to break someone's spirit. I was told all of my vehicles were being taken away even before they found the shoe. That made no sense. I was denied the ability to call my family, talk to my attorney. My rights were being suspended. I wasn't being arrested. I was being detained. Detectives took advantage of my feelings for my family by referring to them over and over. It was a lot. After the search, they took me home and there was media outside. Someone followed me to my garage door. She walked briskly to my house. It didn't help my situation that the media had been tipped off. I have $1 million life insurance policy and I didn't want my family to go through more torture. I don't know what I was thinking, but if I could spare them pain and put money in their hands, I'm not guilty. I didn't kill Mr. Gehrman, but I did self-harm. They came in, pulled me out, and put me in the ambulance. Detective Jappy came in and tried to extract a confession. It was conveyed if I just pled guilty, objection sustained. I said, I'm innocent, but I don't want my family to go through this. I knew I would prove I'm innocent at trial, but I don't want my family to go through the pain. I'm not certain how we started leading off with Mr. Gehrman's request to get the emails between me and Roberta, but there were a lot, hundreds of pages. We were trying to see if we could get them to you so you can decide if their motive for murder. It'll be given to the jury, by the way. He shows photos of his Yukon. My Yukon doesn't have worn paint around the windshield like the killer. I don't have access to Photoshop in jail, so I can't modify the photo. My doors, they lock and unlock. So if someone opens my car door, they could flip up or flip down the visor. Again, he's just going back to that whole frame theory. And it is in every other answer that he gives on cross. Just a little preview for you there. He said he installed cameras on September 5th after he and his wife heard what they thought was a gunshot in their neighborhood. He moves on to the tweets about Jeff. You heard about that tweet with me joking about the rustling in the trash that I tweeted out June 18th. But what you didn't see were other tweets because when they produced it, they did not produce the replies. My last tweet regarding Jeff is on June 19th, and I tag Review Journal. He says in the tweet, it wasn't so much lashing out as much as it was making sure you finished the story about the website and maybe poking a little fun winky face. He said he put something on his campaign website explaining the things that he disputed that was in Jeff's first story. June 16th, I had sent a text to a friend who had checked in on me, and I said, it's all good. I'm not mad. At this point, I was over it and happy to move on. Gehrman said he was going to do a third article about the website. I don't give a damn, LOL. I figure out how to do things legally. Then at this point, he asked to stand up and show the jury why he doesn't wear name brand shoes at the office. He stands up and says, I don't know if you noticed the height difference. I wear shoe lifts. It's a vanity thing. I want to feel a little taller. He says he's 6'5.5". I think he got that backwards and meant 5'6.5". He said that the shoes he has on, and they're a pair of black dress shoes, and he's showing them to the jury. He said that they have built-in lifts, and it's designed so they don't slip off your foot. You can't put a lift in a name brand shoe because it would slip right off. I'd be kicking my shoes off every time I walked. I never wore name brand shoes in the office, and that'll be discussed in closings as well as how that's relevant. He goes on to the shoes in the house. I didn't cut up a shoe and hide it under my couch. I didn't cut up a hat, put it in an open door of my toolbox. I didn't kill Mr. Gehrman, and I didn't take a bag with my kids' football and basketball and use it in the commission of a murder. Again, I didn't kill Mr. Gehrman. I want to share thoughts about the killer. It's strange to me the killer walked around the neighborhood. There is an objection that is sustained, and the judge said that he can only talk about facts and observations. Robert continues, you saw a document with searches for Jeff Gehrman. Pages get pushed up when they do a search. If you Google Rob Tejas for Nevada, you go to my page and you click it. Google says we're going to push this up and get it up the chain. When I was doing the searches, if I were looking for his personal information, I wouldn't Google him over and over again. He shows these searches. What was put in the search field was Jeff Gehrman, Las Vegas Public Administration. If I was trying to find his address, I wouldn't put public administration in the search. I also searched Jeff Gehrman, Las Vegas Rob for NV. All it would do is bump the search on my page. There's services where people manually type in these search terms, whether here in the country or all over the world. I don't know if you call it cheating to get someone to do this, but I thought if Rita had lied, it was fair game for me to push my website up so it would lead them to my side of the story. I didn't search for Jeff Gehrman. And when I saw this supposed search, when I looked for his car, you have to have an address. I didn't know his address. Never been to his house. Did not do a Google Maps search. These photos of his home, I don't know why anyone would do that. Take 100 photos? I don't know what the purpose of that is. When you surveil a person, you go in person. You're not snapping a bunch of photos. The state introduced screenshots of articles and Facebook messages I had with John Cahill. I was actually saving those for a lawsuit. After I lost the election, I felt they were fair game. If I tried to sue in advance of the election, people would not like it. I wanted to win. And he says, I think I came close to winning, but I didn't, so I thought I would sue them. He shows the draft of a lawsuit. He was going to also act as his own attorney in this lawsuit. He said, this is why I captured some of these photos. I've done research where DNA had been planted. One was an officer-involved shooting. There's an objection that is sustained. He said the day of the murder, I watched TV or was working. Around 10-ish, I went for a walk, came home, got ready, and went to the gym. My phone was scanned at the gym at 12:09. I'm a techie person, and I abandoned the keychain a while ago, and I used my phone. He brings in text messages from the day of the murder, points out he texted his daughter, got an email at 9 a.m., still had my phone when I got this message from Cora And when I got this text that was spam about selling my home, and I didn't respond to Macy's, still have my phone. He says they're going to try to say I didn't have my phone. He says at 1:26 p.m. his ex-wife sends him a message. I didn't immediately respond. I don't feel the need to immediately respond to texts. Sometimes I won't respond until the next day. It depends on my mood. I don't think there's anything suspicious about my phone, except for those 100 plus photos of Jeff Gearman's house, but let's move on. He said he went to the gym about 12, checked in 12:09, worked out, went home, picked up the kids later. And then he says, I can't imagine the kind of person, objection sustained. I can't imagine myself, objection sustained. I'm not the kind of person who would stab someone. The judge says the objection is sustained. He says he's never beat anybody up, never killed anyone. I did not kill Mr. Gearman. That's my testimony. That was the end of his testimony up there telling his narrative. But it's time for cross. And boy, I have to say, I'm nowhere near finished with cross, but it has been fireworks. And this prosecutor, top of his game. This guy is a bulldog, and he's very subtle in how he does it sometimes. You could see Robert start to get flustered. Cross. If I heard you correctly, many times during your testimony, you stated that this is the killer of Mr. Gearman. This is, by the way, showing a video or photo of the suspect. He said that I didn't necessarily, but I'm sure it is. You said one thing that struck you about the autopsy, you were struck by the violence of it. He said, no, I didn't say that. The state asked, but the photos bothered you. Why? He said, it's gruesome and I'm not used to seeing dead people. You said it looked like someone who knew what they were doing. You believe this was a professional hit? Robert says yes. They show a photo of the suspect. And the state says the assassin seems to wear a really big sun hat. That's noticeable. Do you think that would attract attention? Robert says he didn't think so. Bright orange shirt, is that professional? Robert says yes. So you believe a professional assassin likes to draw attention to themselves? Robert says, I believe when they're trying to frame someone. Your assassin's wearing a saddlebag. Wearing Nikes? Yes. State plays the video of the suspect and says, this is your assassin walking in the middle of the day. Robert says, my assassin, and the state says, the assassin. Do you agree this is the killer's car? Yes. The state says it's a maroon Denali, and you own a maroon Denali. Yes. They show footage of the killer coming back to the scene after the murder. The state says it seems like the assassin is looking like he forgot something. Robert says, I don't know what he's doing. State says, but the killer kills someone in broad daylight, parks far away, walks back to the car, and comes back. Why do you think they did that? Robert says, I think that the person wanted the car to be seen in front of the house. The state says, but he didn't park on Braun's Circle. Robert says, well, if you want to be sure you got the job done first and not park out there. And the state says, so he parks away from the house, walks back to the car, comes back by the house and leaves. Do you think this is part of the assassin's plan? Doesn't that look amateurish? Robert says, I wouldn't use my own car. You thought that looks just like my vehicle. Robert says, except for the rims. The state initially said, we'll get to that. But then the state's like, no, we're going to talk about this right now. Shows a photo of the car and the rims of the suspect car. The state points out that in the 12 o'clock position on these tires, towards the top of the tire at 6 o'clock is the bottom. When you look at the front wheel, the spokes are not the same size. They alternate in thickness. So at 12 o'clock, it's narrow, and then both sides, it's wider. In the 6 o'clock position, it's a thick spoke with two narrow spokes beside it. So there's 6 different spokes on this car. So just to be clear, if it's thick on one side of the spoke, the opposite side is thinner. Then the state puts up a photo of Robert's car. He says, the one you don't normally drive. You said your rims are different, but let's look at the front tire. The state goes through and points out the rims are just the same as what was seen as far as the thickness of the spokes on the suspect car. And then you said you saw a tweet from General Bob Custer on Twitter and you thought, my rims are different. You relied on someone on Twitterverse to give you a peace of mind about whether or not your car matches the killer's car. Robert says yes. Prosecution counts the spokes. There are 6, and Robert says they are similar, but they're not the same rims. State goes through all the spokes again compared to the killer's car. And Robert says similar to the killer's car. The state asks, isn't it the same on all of your wheels? They have some back and forth. Ultimately, Robert says yes. They show the tinted windows on the suspect vehicle. The front windows are not tinted, but the back ones are. And then they show Robert's car. The front isn't tinted, but your back ones are. Is that a coincidence? Robert says, I don't think so. I think the killer got a car just like mine. The state says, would you agree the killer's car is just like yours then? Robert says, no, there's a difference in the paint on the lower left side that Mr. Mogg testified about. They move on to the visors being down. They show a photo of his car in the driveway at his house with the visor down. And you're suggesting the professional hitman in the funny hat knew about your visor? He says, Mr. Mogg pulled my visor down. The state says, did you see him do it? No. So you're speculating. Robert says, I'm speculating about who did it. Could have been another officer. And the state says, oh, now maybe another officer? How many officers are part of this conspiracy? Robert says, I couldn't tell you, sir. Robert says Mr. Mogg made some false representations about what happened, so yes, I don't know what his motivation would be otherwise. The state asks, you believe it was the police, even though you didn't witness anything like that happening? Robert says, I know, I didn't commit the murder. The state says, but you never saw anybody manipulate your car, and Robert says, not firsthand. When the state mentions again, the visor is down, just like in the killer's car, Robert says, well, anyone could have done it at any time. The state says, so the answer is yes. And Robert says, without knowing who did it, yes. The state says, yesterday you talked for approximately 2 hours, and then you came today and talked for another hour or so. But there's one thing you didn't mention, the DNA. So I'd like to talk about that. You're not disputing your DNA is under his fingernails. Robert says, yes, I am. He says, I don't know if it was there or at what point it could have gotten there. The state says, I'm not asking you how it got there, but you're not denying it was there. Robert says, without knowing the truth, yes, I am. The state says, oh, so you're saying now the DNA lab is in on it too. Robert says, I don't know at what point the sample was collected. So he's asked, how in the world did your DNA get under Jeff's fingernails? Robert says, I don't know. I didn't kill him. I don't know that the DNA ever was under his fingernails. The state asks, you and Jeff aren't friends. No. Did you ever hang out with him? He said, sir, I didn't hang out with Mr. Gearman when he was alive. That caught my attention. Just one of those little things that kind of stood out to me. So no opportunity for him to put his hands on you in any social situation. And these two people who aren't friends, your DNA happens to be under his fingernails. Robert says, I believe at some point it was planted because I didn't kill him. The state says, so with that logic, even if it was planted, you're admitting your DNA was under his fingernails? Robert says, whether it came from the fingernails or a different sample altogether, I don't know. Robert still doesn't acknowledge the DNA is under Jeff's fingernails. And he says, so you're going to disregard what all the DNA witnesses said about this? And Robert says, yes. The state asked, if someone was fighting for their life and scratches someone, could that put DNA under the fingernails? And Robert says, is that speculation? But he says yes. They move on to a photo of his couch. They show that shoe and the chopped up shoe. That's the shoe the killer was wearing, right? And Robert says, I don't know that that's the case. But the state says it looks a heck of a lot like it. Yes, it could be the same model, but it could be a different size. The state says it's the exact same shoe, right? Yes. Your DNA was in those shoes and they were in your house. Robert said, I don't know that to be the case. The state says, that's the whole setup thing. And I think the DNA people are framing me. Robert says, them or someone else. He said, I believe there are officers, when a fellow officer needs help plugging holes in a case, they're willing to do what they have to do. And the prosecutor kind of laughs as he says, okay. Robert says, I think Detective Jappy decided he wanted me for this, and everyone decided to assist him. The state says, so now Detective Jappy's on it? And Robert says, oh, he's always been a part of it. The prosecutor says, so we have the DNA lab, Detective Jappy, Mog, and we haven't even touched Compass Realty yet. Robert says, they paid Detective Jappy. He's asked, are the shoes found under the sofa in your house yours? Robert says, I don't know for sure. I have similar ones. So the state puts up a photo of his shoe that was found on his phone next to those rock climbing shoes that were shown yesterday. They ask if that's his. And when you wore those shoes, you left some of your DNA in it. And now you're saying it's a coincidence? The same shoes sitting under your couch in your house with your DNA in them isn't the same shoe? Robert says, I was under surveillance by Detective Jappy, and this is the day I was under surveillance. The state asks again, and then Robert says, I don't know that they are the same shoes. When someone chops up a shoe and puts it under a couch, it's a little strange. The state points out the date is August 19th of that photo, and Robert said again, surveillance started August 16th. He said he probably took this photo of the Nike next to the rock climbing shoe to show his wife he was doing rock climbing indoors. And the state says, so you're saying because you're under surveillance, they knew the kind of shoes you wore? Yes. He says, you've seen the photos from surveillance. You weren't wearing the Nikes? Robert says, not everything was produced to me. And the state says, of what was produced to you, which is everything. Robert says, no, it wasn't. The prosecution says, you're not wearing the Nikes on the days you were surveilled. Robert says, that's not true. The state says, so you're wearing your little moccasins or topsiders. Robert doesn't know what topsiders are. And the prosecutor says they're just boat shoes. But if Compass framed you, how would they know about these shoes? Well, Robert says, I was under surveillance by Metro. They took photos and provided them to Detective Jappy. The state asked, well, then what did he do? And Robert said, pass them on to whoever he needed to. The state says, there's no way. Compass knows you had shoes like that. Robert says, not without being informed. The photos of the shoes were found after you were arrested, and you had your phone with you the day you were arrested? Yes. You didn't give it to Detective Jappy in early September? No. So the only way anybody could see inside your phone was after the murder, and Robert says no. So you think someone could have found the contents of your phone before? Robert says yes, we've heard phones can be hacked. The state points out that was your attorney that said that. Nobody testified to that. He asks again, did you have your phone all through August? And Robert says, not in my sight at all times. The state asks, did you give your phone to Compass Realty? Robert says, well, that'd be weird. They move on to the scissors that have blood on them. Robert said he acknowledged his blood was on there. And the state says, so Metro got that right. That wasn't a frame job. And Robert says he thinks they did use some of that DNA from the scissors. You think Metro's framing you? Robert says, I think Metro has some officers that are overzealous and help Jappy plug holes in his case, not knowing his relationship with Compass Realty. The state says, well, if Las Vegas Metro wanted to frame you, why didn't they put the murder weapon in your house? Wouldn't that be an even better case with Garriman's DNA on the murder weapon in your house? Robert says, yeah. The state asks, does that make any sense? And Robert says, I think it does. He said, it's strange that 5 days after the murder, the shoes and the hat are in my house. He's asked, what's the most notable thing on the killer's person? Robert says, the shirt. Oh, it's not in your house? No. If they wanted to frame you, why didn't they put the bright orange shirt in your house? Robert says, maybe for plausibility's sake, they put half of this stuff in my house. The state asked, if they wanted to frame you, why isn't Garriman's DNA in your car? Robert's kind of shaking his head and pauses. And he says, sir, I don't know. You wash your car prior to your arrest. Robert says, the outside only. You said after Roberta told you it looked like your car, you went outside and washed it? Robert says, no, I didn't say that. I said I went out and washed all 3 cars. The state says, but yeah, if you only washed one car, that might look a little suspicious. And Robert says, I wasn't planning on things to be suspicious or not suspicious. The state asked if washing a car would get rid of DNA. Robert says, I would think DNA would be on the inside of the vehicle, not the outside, sir. But the state says, yes or no. Washing things could make evidence go away. Robert says, possibly yes. They bring in the phone evidence with the photos of Gearman's house from Google Maps. That was from August 12th, 2022. Robert says it reports to have appeared on that day. Robert agrees. You don't have to go to Bronze Circle to get the images, you can get them online. 2 or 3 weeks before the murder. And Robert says, if we can trust that date, yes. You have no reason to be there. Jeff didn't give you his address, but we go through these images and that's his house. Robert says it looks like that's the house. They show a photo of the side of the house where Jeff was found. And the state says if we look, that's literally the very spot Jeff breathes his last breath. That's the last spot we see him from that camera. He's lying there. Robert says it looks similar. And the state says similar. It's the exact same area. The spot his body is lying is inside your phone. Robert says that's very strange. How does someone plan to have a victim in a particular area of their home? The state says if you plot to kill someone, you would want to get a lay of the land. And if you're planning something you want to prepare, Robert says, well, it depends on what you're doing. So the state says, well, for instance, your job, you want to be prepared. And then there's over 100 images of Bronze Circle on your phone. Robert says, I don't know that. And then he just out of the blue says, I wouldn't use my car. Robert says if it's in there, he didn't put it in there. I don't know it's in there, and I certainly didn't put it in there. You're asking me to testify to something I cannot say is true. The state asked if his expert looked at the same phone. Sure. Did your expert say your phone was compromised? Robert says we didn't ask. But the state says you didn't complain about any of the messages on your phone from September 2nd. Robert agrees. So you're okay with what you had on there, but when we find things on your phone, you say you've been hacked. Robert says, I believe if someone was trying to frame me, they would leave my stuff on there as well as what they decide to put on there. State points out in one photo, there is a security camera that's being focused in on. Robert says that's what it appears to be. And that brings up a question I have. And the state says, sir, there's no pending questions. You can say on redirect whatever you need to say. He asks, what was your first job? IT. You said you're a techie. You know your way around computers, different software. He says, you sure know how to use Google Maps. Robert says a lot of people do. The state says there is 132 images on your phone. That's attention to detail. Robert says if that's on my phone, I would say yes. But Robert said he didn't take those photos. Could have been placed on my phone. Who knows? The state says it was found on your phone. Robert says it was found on an image of my phone. They bring up the car report of Jeff's. Robert says that it's a Honda owned by Mr. Gearman. Robert admits he knows about the IDI core software that's used by the PA's office. And Robert asks, what is the search term that was used to bring up this result? The state says, sir, there are no pending questions. He asks Robert, what's the first address associated with Jeff Gearman? Robert says a P.O. box and then Bronze Circle. State points out, this was found on your phone. Robert says, I don't know that it is. And the state says, look, we just don't have to do this dance. Information about the cars. Search terms was Jeff's address on Tuesday, August 23rd, 2022 at 11:05 a.m. Robert says that's what it reports to be. But he says, I don't know if that was modified by a PDF viewer. The state says that a witness testified this document was not converted. Robert says, well, I didn't do the searches, so I don't know. The state asked, do you have random people coming into your office and using your software? Robert says it could have been modified in many, many ways. So he's asked, did you allow people to use your computer at work? Robert says, I didn't allow it, but I can't say it didn't happen if I wasn't around. State points out there are no outgoing messages or calls from 8:48 a.m. to 2:05 p.m. on the day of the murder. And you never reported your phone was hacked prior to September 2nd. And Robert says, I wouldn't have known. State asks, is Rita Reed in on the conspiracy? And Robert says she took money from Compass and someone named Adam Fint, but he can't say either way. The state asks, can we rule Rita out? And Robert says, You have to make me seem like I'm crazy for it, but there's evidence to back up what's been occurring. The state asks, can we rule out Rita? Robert says, I don't know that we can. I'd be surprised, but I don't know if we can rule it out. He asks about Alicia Goodwin. Robert says she's in on part of it. State asks, is she part of the conspiracy to murder Jeff? Robert says it's unlikely, but anything is possible. Mr. Cahill? Highly unlikely, but can't rule it out. Thomas with Compass Realty? He says he thinks it's likely that he's in on the conspiracy to murder Jeff. The state asks, Compass as a whole is part of this conspiracy to kill Jeff? Robert says the best way to take me out is to frame me for murder. You were a thorn to Compass? Robert says yes. State says you went to the police and you fought them until you left the office. The issue is you were the public administrator. You stood in their way. Robert says yes. So that's where we're going to end part one. I still have an hour and a half of testimony or cross exam to watch. So hoping I can get this one edited and out and then pick up and get the second one out. We'll see how late it gets. But whew, I don't think I've ever seen anything like this in the years I've been doing what I do. It is so bizarre. Tomorrow will be redirect, and then I think we hit closings. And man, we could have a verdict tomorrow. I do not think this is going to take very long. I don't think he's convinced this jury of much at all, but we will see. Juries are unpredictable, but I'll eat my shoe if this is a hung jury or not guilty. All right, guys, we will see you for part two soon. Hope you guys have a good rest of your evening.